And with that, I will introduce our next speaker, Dr. Svanes, who is a professor at the Center for International Health at University of Bergen and consultant in pulmonary medicine at the Department of Occupational Medicine, Auckland University Hospital. Forgive me if I pronounced that wrong. She shares her time between clinical and scientific work. She is an international top expert in the fields of preconception and early life origins of respiratory health and disease. Dr. Svanes has conceived and leads the multi-generation study RHINE and is a member of the steering committee and leads the work on early life origins in the ECRHS, which is the world's largest international study of asthma and allergies in adults. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Svanes and thank you in advance for your presentation.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be invited to this session. I think it's an extraordinary, interesting conference, and it's nice that we can attend from many places in the world. And I'll now share my screen. And there, I hope you have my presentation. And I want to say something about parental smoking, limiting that to father smoking, mostly in pre-puberty, and occupational exposures as related to offspring asthma. Sorry. I want to talk about father smoking and then only about mother's exposure to disinfectants and cleaning agents. So this occupational exposure to disinfectants and cleaning agents is very relevant with regard to COVID now. And it's a mixed chemical exposure, quite different from smoking, of course. But I think it is of major interest to also assess a different type of chemical exposure. So about father smoking, I'll first show you graphs showing when people start smoking all over Europe, in women and men, North, East, South, West Europe, published by Marcon 2018. And all people start smoking at the age of 16 to 20 years, and that's what these red graphs are showing. However, the green graphs are showing starting to smoking before age 15, and actually these graphs are going down, going up. In all regions of Europe, they are going up, at least in women, but mostly so West Europe, with mostly UK and South Europe. But actually smoking is still increasing all over Europe among the very youngest. And this study is not including use of e-cigarettes or smokeless tobacco, which is very much used in North Europe. So showing a study back in time, we wanted to look at effects of father smoking before conception. When fathers started smoking, total years of smoking before conception, numbers of cigarettes daily, and smoke-free time from quitting until conception. And we wanted to investigate the potential vulnerability windows, which would be particularly important with regard to potential intervention. And in a first analysis of 24,000 offspring-parent pairs, we found if father smoked only before conception, there was an increased asthma risk in offspring of 1.48. And if mother smoked only before conception, that risk was not significantly increased. If father started smoking before age 15, however, there was a very much increased risk for asthma. And if father started smoking after age 15, but smoked more than 10 years prior to conception, and actually most fathers had a lot of their children after they were 30, so it's a large group, their odds ratio was 1.5. We also looked at welding, which is a different mixed chemical exposure plus physical exposure to heat, and found increased offspring asthma and paternal grandmother smoking in relation to offspring asthma. So this study pointed to this time window of age 15 being particularly important. And this finding has been, and so the conclusion was that age of starting smoking was very important, while total years of smoking, yes, appear to be important. However, numbers of cigarettes daily, we found no effects whatsoever. However, we don't have data on how many cigarettes they smoked before age 15 years. So it's not really dose response. We couldn't investigate that. And I don't know of any study that can actually do that yet. About smoke-free time from quitting until conception, there was no effect. So whether fathers quit smoking 10 years before or 2 years before offspring were conceived did not make any difference. One interesting finding on grandmother, and remembering the positive effects Jean Golding showed of grandmother smoking, we found that if fathers smoked before age 15, this strong increased risk was not present if paternal grandmother had smoked. But looking at the next time window, fathers smoking after age 15 and more than 10 years, that risk was very much the same, whether his mother had smoked or not. And also the welding effect was quite similar or stronger if grandmother had smoked. So one may wonder whether in utero exposure could somehow interact with exposure before age 15, but not after. This is a curious finding we published years ago, and I never get any response to that, but I think we need to try to find out why. These findings on father smoking before age 15 years in relation to offspring asthma lung function have been validated now in several studies of different cohorts. First, the study published by Accordini et al. On ECRHS data, where they use very advanced statistical analysis, and they do find the same message. Then a next analysis by Accordini et al. The paper is not yet published, but the abstract, but the analysis are using the ECRHS RHINE data set, and the outcome is lung function, and they're using even more advanced statistical models used for causal inference, and they are still finding that this time window is important also for lung function, only among fathers. Then there is a study not published yet by Jarvis et al. On health survey for England data, rather crude data with asthma's outcome, but looking at biological and non-biological offspring, and again confirming a role of father smoking before conception on offspring asthma, if it's his biological offspring. And it appears to be as strong as that of mother smoking in pregnancy. So this time window, so this is just showing something about the complexity about the epidemiological analysis, accounting for factors in 3 generations. So these analyses are much better accounting for confounding factors or disturbing factors than any other analysis I have been doing on 1 generation. And this is the result of the model. And here is another complex model again. This is just the final result of a very complex analysis on lung function, and showing some data from this health survey of England, showing that father smoking prior to conception, and particularly if starting age 8 to 14 years, was associated with more asthma in biological offspring, but not in non-biological offspring. So we were interested in these time windows, and I think this is rather crude, but with regard to in utero exposure of this will be paternal grandmother, we found an effect of that, of smoking on great offspring asthma. With regard to this pre-puberty time window, we found effects of father's smoking, but also on asthma and lung function, and we also see effects of father's overweight in this puberty time window. So now we're far away from smoking. It's just investigating again this pre-puberty time window that also have been studied in historical studies from the Överkalix cohort, and also in ALSPAC, a study on smoking before age 12 or 11. Finally, we also do find effects related to post-puberty smoking and welding with regard to offspring asthma. So all this, the outcome is asthma or lung function. If we move to women, to mothers' exposure to disinfectants and cleaning agents, it's a quite different exposure. All these types of work have increased exposure to cleaning agents and disinfectants. It's hairdressers, cleaners, cooks, nurses, midwives, childcare workers. It's a lot of types of works. It's blue collar, but also white collar work related to cleaning products and disinfectants. And we were interested in investigating time windows in which mother's exposure might influence offspring. And we wanted to separate the preconception time window from the during pregnancy time window and the time window of shared environment after birth. And with regard to occupation, this is extremely complex. We have another publication from our team where we have not really been able to look at this time window because there will be, there are so very many occupations and so few people in each group. But let's see, when we looked at real life data, and these are data on some 3,000 and something offspring of more than 1,000 women who had some kind of exposure within an occupation. The first scenario, the yellow arrow, is refers to a group of offspring with mothers who were exposed or had any type of work with cleaning agent disinfectants only before conception, and they actually quit a median time of 7 years before conception. Now this is a small group, but there was a tendency of an increased odds ratio of 1.5, not significant in this group. A much larger group, scenario 2, of women, they started this kind of work before conception and continued. And the odds ratio was very similar, 1.7, but this was highly significant in relation to offspring's asthma, that is. The third scenario, mothers starting in any work with such exposure around the 2-year period related to birth, showed doubled risk, barely significant, but it was significant. This period include pregnancy and up to 15 months pre-pregnancy or a year after. And then 470 offspring had mothers who started such work after they were born. And there was an odds ratio of 1.0. So both comparing to children with no such maternal exposure and comparing with children whose mothers started such exposure after they were born, it seems rather convincing that preconception exposure might be important. And one may speculate whether an influence of microbiome could be carried across to offspring, or its direct epigenetic effects. This study, it's a beginning, it's not published yet, needs to be investigated further. And then came Corona. So my data are based on exposure back in time, and now exposures has increased enormously. And here's one of my patients in the newspaper. Her asthma has gotten so much worse because they're spraying around disinfectants at work all the time. And what will happen about future asthma, about future offspring health when everybody are so exposed to disinfectants? We can just ask. In conclusion, when it comes to father smoking starting before age 15 years, the relation to asthma and lower lung function offspring seems fairly solid from a investigation of 4 different cohorts and with increasingly solid statistical methods. But this needs, of course, further work with regard to more mechanistic work to try to sort out whether this time window really works. When it comes to this pre-puberty time window among men, our studies suggest that this might be as important maybe as the pregnancy time window in women. And I'm saying solid results from epidemiological studies, but there are not, it's very, very difficult to get data on father's puberty and offspring health. But those data will be getting there when the large children cohorts are getting children. About mother's exposure to disinfectants and cleaning agents, we found relation to offspring asthma, which is quite worrying. And this needs replication. I don't know which cohorts would have detailed enough parental exposure information about enough parents to replicate that, but it would be a very important thing to do, I think, and also to do mechanistic work. So to me, these analyses suggest that beyond genes, want to establish a framework to estimate germ cell impact when new exposures come along. And I think this is urgently needed. For instance, with regard to e-cigarettes, with regard to this oral moist tobacco, which is used in Norway, North Europe, very much by young people in pregnancy. It's not considered dangerous. And also with regard to the current use of disinfectants in relation to the pandemics. We have no idea what's going to happen in the future, but our previous studies suggest this might be important. Thank you.